team. Now let's look at what the new management team looks like now for Main Street Bank. The chairman is now Mr. Falalu Bello, while the managing director will be Mrs. Faith TUEDOR Matthews. For Keystone, we have Jacobs Ajekigbe and Mr. Oti Ikome as the managing director. Now for Enterprise Bank, the new chairman is Mr. Emeka Onwoka, while the new managing director will be Mr. Ahmed Kuru. Now looking at their profiles closely now for the Main Street Bank, the chairman, Mr. Falalu Bello, is a former group managing director of Unity Bank PLC, who resigned from the bank in July 1st earlier this year. Now for Keystone Bank, we have Mr. Jacobs Ajekigbe, is a former managing director of First Bank, and he takes over as chairman of Keystone. Now Enterprise Bank, formerly Spring Bank, has as its chairman Mr. Emeka Onwoka, who is a former managing director of Diamond Bank, and he retired on April the 1st, 2011, after serving the bank for about 19 years. Now, last week, the global markets, we saw a huge sell-off of stocks by investors. Of course, this followed the credit ratings downgrade by Standard & Poor's of the U.S., the sovereign debt from AAA to AA+. Now, of course, that sent the indices into the red. Now, for the year-to-date return of the Dow has lost about, Dow is now currently 1.15% in the negative for this year, while the technology NASDAQ is also in the negative this year, down 4.54%. The S&P 500 is also in the negative for the year, down 4.63%, while for the smaller cap stocks, talking about the Russell 2000, stock is the bourse is currently also in the negative for this year, down 8.81%. Now, last Friday, the Dow stayed afloat, managed to stay afloat despite all that happened at the bourse last week. It stayed afloat at 0.54%, while the NASDAQ lost 0.94%. The S&P 500 also in the negative, down 0.06%, while the Russell 2000 was the biggest loser last week, down 1.67%. Wale Oluwo from BGL Group is joining me now. We're looking at the central bank's latest move, talking about the three new banks. Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us. I know you've had a very busy schedule this morning.
Yeah,
now,
absolutely.
The Central Bank of Nigeria took literally everybody by surprise when they called that the meeting, when the NDIC meeting on Friday, where it was announced that the three banks, AfriBank, Bank PHB and Spring Bank, would be handed over to Bridge Banks, would be taken over basically by the NDIC. Now, what was the first thing that went through your mind when you heard that?
Honestly, the first thing that came through my mind was, this is an ambush. It's an ambush.
Why do you say so?
I think it's an ambush to house the powers of the shareholders. Fine, I can understand that CBN is trying to implement a reform program. I can understand that, you know, some of the shareholders are creating problems for CBN, and some of them have gone to court. But I can also understand the frustration of CBN. If you are doing a reform, chances are that when people are bringing problems, you can be desperate and take some actions. If you look at it from the beginning to the end, it appears that CBN is not comfortable with the position the existing shareholders were taking, and everything that has happened now would, I think, substantially give credence to those who have said that all these things the CBN is doing is like working to a particular answer. It may not necessarily be so, but the truth of the matter is that I'm sure there are other ways we could have done this better. For me, setting a deadline of September, not waiting for that September to come, appears to be substantially preemptive.
Now, well, the central bank said, yes, it did give a September 30 deadline, and at a point it was confident after the first four banks signed TIEs with co-investors, it was also confident that these three banks would also find investors to recapitalize them before September 30th. But the central bank says it has the responsibility as an apex regulator to ensure that there's financial stability, and it's saying that if it notices the fact that these banks, despite the fact that they haven't reached this deadline, if it says that they still do not have, that it's not possible for them to recapitalize before that time. Now, why not take that preemptive action and come in and, of course, not use the option of liquidation, nationalize these banks, and come up with a package that would ensure depositors' funds are safe. And, of course, we have the employees.
Okay, but the question is, what will happen to the existing shareholders?
Yes.
What will happen to the existing shareholders in the banks?
Okay, well, you're saying they weren't consulted?
Well, I mean, nobody has come to us and said this is what will happen to the existing shareholder.
Okay.
In a banking equation,
okay, in this
different
scenario,
stakeholders.
what would happen to the shareholders?
I think technically they must have lost their shares. But I'm not CBN. I cannot talk for the Central Bank of Nigeria. Let them come out and say, this is what has happened to the shareholder. Because one thing I said on this program earlier was that what we had put in these banks was public funds.
Okay.
Now, we had waited for how many months? Almost like a year and a half. The truth of the matter is, we could have waited much longer. You know, I said it about 2 weeks ago on this program. I said
it's a bank guarantee is still there. Nobody knows how much the federal government is spending.
What is going to happen in December? You unplug the interbank guarantee, and then you are using another government money to push into the banks today.
But the issuance of bonds, where is that going to? Because the central bank
is going to
be able to retrieve the 620 billion it's injected from these banks.
Don't bother about that. Who is paying? Is it a shareholder from outside that is paying? Somebody must be paying. This is a cash thing. It is the CBN that is paying itself. Nothing has changed. Are
you talking about the issuance of bonds?
Even the bonds
is
being issued by AFGHAN. Who is the shareholder, or who are the shareholders of AFGHAN? It's the Ministry of Finance and the Central Bank. It's the government money.
Is that where so that is where the funds will come from? The
funds are going to come because the AFGHAN is going to be the eventual, is going to bear the eventual repayment obligations on those bonds. So the AFGHAN is issuing bonds just to raise liquidity. But who is the obligor here? It's still the AFGHAN. Who owns AFGHAN? It's still the Central Bank of Nigeria. So what the CBN has done is just to pay itself and create the impression that banks have been recapitalized. But what I've been saying is this. Look, we had put government monies in these banks earlier. 600 and something billion. That is how much of public funds we have committed.
Okay.
Now, with this action of last weekend, we have now committed another 600 and something billion
of taxpayers' money,
which was almost avoidable to me. And I'd always been saying that this September 30th is not a date set by the Constitution of Nigeria. It's not a date set by the House of Assembly. It's not a date set by the President. It's an administrative date set by CBN itself. We can be very dynamic about it. Now, the issue is we have put additional 600 and something billion in the banks now, right? What is going to happen? CBN is still indirectly the one putting money in the banks. But only one group has lost in the whole equation. Is the existing shareholders. Because that wait that we recommended that CBN should wait it out, it is now still going to wait it out for another 3 years based on the pronouncement that they gave. So nothing has changed. The banks are still not in the hands of new owners. So what you have just done is to take out the old owners and then you put CBN. And then you want to sell them within 3 years. The truth of the matter is, who is going to sell them now is AFGHAN. Who owns AFGHAN? CBN and Federal Ministry of Finance. So nothing has changed. So that's why I see this as almost a big ambush to house the powers of the shareholders. I don't know.
Can there be like a share swap of some kind like we saw in the Eurozone? I'm thinking, I know there was no mention of shareholders. The central bank said that it hopes the shareholders will go along with this new arrangement.
What is there to go along with? AFGHAN owns the bank, sir, substantially. You see, I'm not against CBN's reforms.
Okay.
That's the truth of the matter. But any reform we do, let it be clear the kind of objective we want to achieve.
Financial stability, protecting depositors' funds. I'm quoting the central bank now.
Its
priorities at this point. Why wait for these banks to collapse? 3 of them, they couldn't find co-investors like their counterparts, Oceanic and the rest of them.
But there's an argument to Esther. If these banks were in bad shape and CBN took them over, did you give the shareholders an opportunity to run these banks and turn them around in a way that they'll be attractive to shareholders? We don't know. Who conducted
in 2 months? Well, it's too late. It's pretty
not
much,
2 months. We've been on this for over a year. We've been on this for over a year. That's the truth.
But there's no guarantee that the shareholders would have done any better. Nobody knows.